Hello, welcome back to another episode of D54. I'm Amit, and welcoming back for the first time in 2024, Doug. Welcome, mate.
Hey guys, it's so good to be back. I'm so glad to be back.
What a way to start, huh? We started,
This is a good way to start.
On a different note, you wouldn't expect us to be doing horror this early on, but this movie has been recommended and requested quite a lot. And for some context, there is an upcoming movie by the same director that's coming out soon for this movie, which is a Mammootty movie, which looks absolutely insane. I've got to get you to see the trailer for that too sometime.
Yeah, I haven't watched the trailer for it yet, but I'm glad I didn't because I wanted to go into this pretty blind. And I'm really glad that I did go into it blind because that led me to watching it largely by myself in my basement, which was a terrible idea, but also a great idea.
No, I don't necessarily have to watch movies in the evening, but I do prefer like when the sun is down and there's some kind of mood, like a bright day like it is right now. It kind of there's too much contrast between what I'm watching and what's happening, like, in my life right now. So I do, dim the lights and, make it a bit darker and stuff like that as well. But
you got to be able to see down those hallways. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. But this movie, man, pretty fantastic. I'm going to say right off the bat, man. It was a really good and entertaining movie, a horror movie, which I think we were talking before. This fits into like my wheelhouse kind of horror, because horror is very diverse. We could have gore, we could have psychological, we could have like sci-fi elements to it, fantastical, as we mentioned a little bit before. I guess the only other horror movie that we have covered together was Mani Chitvatare a long time ago that had horror elements to it, and that was probably more in the fantastical side, I would put it.
Yeah, I really
it's more in your face.
I want to say for the first half of the movie, I thought that might be where we were going, because the film did so well, and I completely agree with you. Like, and we talked about it before. This is absolutely in my wheelhouse. If it is going to be a horror film, and we're actually going to be dealing with traditional horror elements, I like ghosts. That always works for me. I like spirit, benevolent or evil. I don't know. There's something about that just kind of calls to me. It works for me. But I thought as we were exploring more with the character of Venu and, potential alcoholism and addiction, and exploring his college backstory and how that was kind of bad for him, and how all of the different elements of grief have worked together to create a crushing situation for a human, I thought we might be dealing with just, hallucinations or anything. And not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I'm really glad it took the direction that it did in the second half, because I was like, all right, are we dealing with an updated version of a story we may have otherwise seen? That's cool. That's still all well and good, but I'm really glad and refreshed by what we did get.
Yeah, no, I was really glad too. And guys, we are going to do the whole watch a scene and react to it. So for all the people that love our reactions, we're going to be doing reactions, but we're going to immerse it with our conversations, obviously, and our sort of commentary about what we thought. But yeah, it is something that because I've not seen too many horror movies. Like horror is a genre that I like, but it's not like my favorite genre or anything like that. Like I do enjoy, I watch them every now and then. I don't really, binge watch horror movies or anything like that. So I like to watch them every now and then. And I think horror movies are not that common in the Malayalam film industry. And guys, obviously in the comment section, correct me if I'm wrong. From what I have seen, like just looking over the last few years of the releases, all of sort of the big feature movies are not horror movies. They seem to be more, the dramas, the thrillers. I would say sometimes romance and sometimes action would also come in. But yeah, stuff like that really goes well. But I did enjoy this kind of horror, and yeah, it is something that, it is a movie that I think it played. I guess the pacing was really good, but it also played on your mind quite a bit as to what is actually going on, because it's not literal. Like you don't see anything really. So it is, I guess there's some spirits involved, I guess, but the whole part about how that's sort of dealt with amongst grief. And obviously the strongest point I really liked about this movie, aside from the horror aspects, which really kick off, I would say, like almost just towards the end, because there's not really too much aside from that, but this whole relationship between the son and the mother, that was really the main story of this movie. I think it's really telling the story between two members of the family who are kind of at odds with each other, not really getting along, and trying to mend that relationship in a way, trying to see what's in the way, exploring the background. Yeah, it was a lot I liked about this movie, man. There was quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I like we had discussed earlier, it was almost do we have enough to say about this movie? Because clearly this movie exists to get us to that last 20 or 30 minutes of the film to really, really get people in those seats. And this is another thing I'm curious about for you fans out there, especially if horror is not common, because you were saying how popular this movie is and how much it got suggested to us. And I can see why, especially for the communal movie experience. That's what horror does so well. Comedy is the other one that does that really well, because you're not sitting in a theater watching Oppenheimer being like, yay, the bomb. And not everybody is like, woohoo. But in a horror movie, everybody is doing these big reactions. In a comedy, everybody's doing these big reactions. And I have to imagine if you're sitting in one of those theaters and you're watching this movie, and that a very effective and very tight and very economical psychological thriller and haunting story is playing out in a setting you recognize, with people you recognize, speaking your language, it must have been so much more thoroughly a communal experience, right? Like, I sit in a theater and I watch, let's say, Hereditary. That's a movie that I could point to as having similar DNA, obviously very different films, but Hereditary is one that I immediately get. And I see this and I'm like, man, imagine sitting there with 10 of your best friends. Maybe your family's there with you too. You would be talking about this for weeks, months. And it would occupy your mind for so long, especially if it's not common in the area or in the filmscape of Malayalam cinema. So please hit us with those comments and all that stuff, because it worked for me. And I really enjoyed it. And I like that this is a director we hadn't experienced. I personally hadn't experienced before. Performers I hadn't experienced before. And I really think it worked to tell a story that got to a big climax so that you can explore how do other people react if something like this actually occurred in an area. And I like that the homeowner is just like, we can't be afraid of these things, even though it was his son that kicked off the inciting incident. Like all those little perspectives, and it ultimately works to make these two people who are broken kind of congeal. So they end up on the right side of it, but everything that it takes to get there is so traumatic to the mind.
Correct. It really did. And that's not even talking about all the great sort of cinematic elements of this movie, from the performances to the freaking cinematography to the music. And we're going to be talking about that as we sort of react to that. So without further ado, man, let's get into the first sort of scene, which I think is a great scene to set this movie up.
Like, that is one thing that I was constantly throughout the whole movie. I was watching these dark hallways because I was expecting something like, and I've talked about it before, The Haunting of Hill House, where if you watch that series through once on Netflix, you'll just see what you would think you are there to see. And then if you watch it again, you'll constantly see spirits, ghosts, other apparitions, little things in the background. And they're not there as Easter eggs. They are there to remind you that, like, no, this was all happening the whole time. And what I liked in this movie is that it isn't until that last 20, 30 minutes that we get that final thing. Of course, there's the other scene, and I'm sure we'll watch it, where we see the foot, the feet underneath the door. But what I like most about that scene is that constrained, singular focus. I want you to want to tear each other apart. And it gets exactly what it's looking for. And it does exactly what it wants to do, because these are two people already teetering on the edge. We know about the son that he's going to be like the father. The mother has that conversation with the therapist earlier on. And we know about the mom that she is very much like her own recently deceased mother and is quick to temper. And our powder keg kind of builds slowly. And this is essentially the lighting of the fuse.
Correct. Yeah, literally. In a way, with the candle. But I was watching it again. There's a lot of sort of foreshadowing, which I don't think I sort of picked up the first time. So she sort of just has that throwaway line, like, I'll lock you up. And like that that crossed my mind a little bit when we sort of see it later on. Happen when he's locked up, but also like the fact that they're at the table, like this is a very central setting for these two to be at. Like, we see them go through different things here, and we're gonna have another scene which can circle back and almost on the other end. Like, it's just as heartbreaking, but in a different way, with that whole table setting and all that stuff. Obviously, we're gonna get that scene, and we're gonna get to that scene later. That scene is crazy. But yeah, man, I mean, like, one thing I did sort of realize about this movie was, because I didn't include the scene, I was tempted to include the opening scene with the grandma sort of passing away, which was also really brilliant. And also, we have to say, like, this movie was fantastic, and we knew it straight away because one, the music and how it started was fantastic, and also those opening credits were just fantastic. They were some of the best
good
opening credits I think I've seen. But the other thing I really liked about this, which was all happens before this and also includes this, is you would think that the passing of the grandma would be like the catalyst for them to sort of, that's the source of tension. But what this movie does really well through the scene with the therapist and a few other scenes as well with Shane Nigam's character as well. Basically, these two, they sort of tell us that like they have always been like this. This is, the way they are has been like this for a long time. It's not because of the grandma passed away. They've had these issues. They've been who they are for a long time. So that's why I think going back to the father references, and we see his relationship with the girlfriend, I guess, which is a very sort of strange one, but like, she basically was like, she has that cool line where she says like, I can excuse you for not being in the mood when your grandma passed away, but you were like that before as well.
Yeah,
so
what was the excuse before?
What was the excuse before? Exactly. So they do a good job of like really making you understand these characters in a really quick and fast way, I think. Like, so good. And this scene just, I put the scene in because it's like probably the first starting point of real like serious tension between these two. Like, they're really at odds against each other. And it does so much because like there is so much, I think the character development and character growth, I guess, for both these characters is fantastic as we sort of see it through. And that's what we loved about this movie. It's only an hour, 40 minutes or something like that. It's
more of these, please. More of these. And not that I don't appreciate something a little bit longer and a little bit more epic and it's something with a little bit more scope, but it is a sign of somebody, especially with how successful as I understand this movie is. It's a sign of a movie that knows immediately what it wants to be and what it wants the audience to know. And everything you just described is a perfect masterwork of a way to make you understand who these characters are through ancillary bits of dialogue as they continue to compound and compress and be in this absolutely terrible place with one another. So that it's eventually forcing them to have a confrontation that will get us to our inevitable conclusion, which luckily for them ends, nice. And we get for them the potential of a happy ending. But
correct.
It really is like that scene, and even in the opening credits with the candles, and we see 3 candles in the opening credits, and we know what that eventually is in reference to, but like it's all dark, unitary focus. And I mean, there's only like a handful of characters in this movie because there doesn't need to be more, right? Sometimes we get those big, beautiful shots of the city, especially during the song and, through the travels through the city, but we don't need that because it's all about this absolutely claustrophobic terror that is starting to grip these people's minds.
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic. And that even from that scene, like they're doing a great job of creating atmosphere already. Like that's what I really got from this. And that's from the performances and from sort of, we sort of mentioned it a few times, but we can't ignore how impactful the music is in this. Like I think for horror movies like this, especially like psychological horror movies, you really have to, because like we sort of, one thing I appreciate about this movie was like it doesn't have your, I guess what your typical tropes would be for a horror movie. There's not excessive jump scares to try and get you out of your seat or something like that. There's nothing grotesque or anything like that. Even all the way to the end, there's really nothing that's gruesome or anything like that. There's no, I guess they don't try and use, I guess, I don't want to call it like, the cheap tactics, but they try and scare you by sort of building up that tension over a certain period of time. Just like that scene, you just tease it with sort of the something in the background is watching you. We don't really get to see much, but we know that, and we feel the dread because, as I said, the perspective and how that's shot with the two sort of facing each other, and it's just sort of panning from one to the other. It almost feels like you're sitting down in the middle of them and just sort of going one to the other and just being like a spectator. I just thought it was just masterful filmmaking, man. And I can't, this director, I'm surprised he's not done more because she obviously has a great eye for filmmaking and knows how to create scenes and atmosphere. Like it's all there.
I was really surprised when it got teed up and I looked into it. I was like, wow, we haven't discussed anything. In the entire past year of me watching these movies and us having these discussions and watching everything else on the channel, entirely unfamiliar, and thankfully so, because I didn't want to go in with any sort of expectation. And I walked out happy as a clam,
definitely.
It also does what every other piece of Malayalam cinema does so well, which is everything every loop gets closed, every sort of the thing that gets teed up at one point is going to get knocked down. Every question gets answered, like, and it's economical here. And that 1 hour,
Definitely.
40-minute runtime is really, it should let you know that especially if a movie is moving at what you would call a slower pace, that you're going to have a wrecking ball of a third act.
And do you ever? Yeah. Well, let's sort of add on and let's see what we have next here. You hear that? Like, there's like a yeah.
I was just thinking, that could be the spirit in the house, like making him act a certain way as well. Like, that, because he can see it's having that effect. It's having the exact opposite effect of the way his words want to be. And we see him acting a little bit later on outside of the home as a far more empathetic person, because in that scene, he kind of presents almost more like a dick, like, I know you're going to be fine. I know you're going to be fine. Aren't those rolling papers? Come on, man. I know this.
Yeah,
I know this. Like it's almost like he's compounded it so thoroughly that it's designed to aggravate. And later on, he doesn't act that way. And that could be a conscious decision, either by the director or the performer. But either way, that scene like got under my skin, because there were multiple times where my dad, would do something like that. Like, come on, son. I know what you're doing. And like, but usually they would let it go. And the way that it was the same words, but like hitting it over and over and over again. And especially after that moment, that very, very tense scene of him being in that room and you seeing those feet kind of underneath that door. It just very good. And now here's the only part I got a little bit confused on, even though it's all kind of in there. When he says he goes to his mom's room and he doesn't see her because she wasn't there. But then there's a scene later on where he goes to the house and is told that they're not in there and doesn't see them there, but then gets a call from inside the house.
Yeah, right.
I think there are moments, and they're not explicitly stated because I plan to go back and rewatch. I think there are moments where the home or whatever the spirit is does that, just subtracts something from your vision. Yeah. To be an isolating experience. And that was a really unique way to kind of present that version of the haunting. Like he went to his mom's room and she wasn't there. And he only says it there. But later on, we do see the scene where the counselor comes to the home and is told they're not there. And then he gets the call from Asha saying, I thought you were coming. Yes, and they weren't there.
They weren't there. Yeah, no, that's almost it's definitely a movie worth rewatching. I think because there were some of those things I also had questions too as to like what is happening, because it does have that, the ghost is obviously messing with you and messing with us as the audience as well, it seems like, because, sometimes I had those questions going too, so I didn't fully understand at times as to what was going on, but I don't think it took away from the experience.
No, it heightened it. It made that mystery a little bit more alluring,
Correct. But I wanted to include the scene because I think it's I think this movie does a good job of sort of, as you sort of talked about it a little bit with the counselor and their sort of role in this, so sort of a whole situation, because there's really two counselors in this movie, and I guess one that I guess the mother rejects some. So because she's seeing a counselor, then this guy comes over as well. But it's like, I don't know, it helps to sort of, the movie is a lot about, I feel, isolation as well, and how you are like both these characters completely isolated, and the happy ending is that they've broken the isolation and come together. But like it sort of, as a society, shows you that like even beyond these two people being there for each other, they really don't have anyone else, and going to like these mental health professionals doesn't really help them. Like I was really like, it felt really bad when the mother kept going in and like the counselor was just like, take these medicines.
Here's another prescription. Here's another prescription.
And that's kind of the same way that this guy is. He's not really listening. He's doing this thing where he's like, okay, I'm hearing what you're saying, but I'm not listening to it. Like I know, like I made my conclusions as to, what's wrong here. It's to do with drinking. It's to do with alcohol. It's to do with your bad past, your absent father, whatever it might be. But it did a really good job of sort of just, I don't know, highlighting that point and sort of making the situation even worse. Like, it's like these two are already estranged, and then you do such a good job of just like introducing the two characters who could be support characters, but they're not. There's actually nobody in this movie that supports any of them, like whoever it is. It's just they are completely alone in this movie. And I got the feeling like even watching the scene, because like there is The other part I really liked about this movie was this character Venu's sort of Nigam, who does a fantastic job. I don't know if he actually didn't sleep for 4 days because he looks like
It looks so good.
he looks
so good.
He looks so gone. Credit to all the makeup artists and him, obviously, with his expressions, but the hairstyle and all that stuff looks like he's just completely off the edge. And we see him, go unhinged more and more as we keep going at times. But essentially, yeah, like it's a really great performance from him. I think I lost my train of thought. I was going to say something, then I lost my train of thought.
Well, here's another cool part about what you're talking about, though, and maybe this will help you regain it. Just like the way he's able to maintain his composure toward the end, in the validation of what he knows to be true, right? So we see him almost change on a dime in that last third act, where we know he knows this is it. There is a truth to this, and now my mom knows too. And that moment, that flip, was really cool, because in most horror movies it's the opposite. We're bad, and then we go exponentially worse, and he was bad and exponentially worse, and then all of a sudden has a unique kind of identified purpose in that they are in this together. And after that happens, he takes on a whole new energy, like the scene where he goes to the fridge. Right. Like that's pretty incredible. And the way he maintains his composure when the glasses get dropped to him, next to him.
Oh my God. Yeah. That was great. Whoa, that was great. That was a great piece of, because I love when movies do this whole thing of repetition, and they sort of, tee us up something. And it's like, the more you see it, the worse it's getting. And that's what it did. But what I was going to say that you helped me remember was like with his character was like in the first, like, I guess almost like hour or plus, there's like this real like nihilistic, like apathetic kind of feeling towards like life in general. Like it's like no one cares about life anymore. It's just like he's going through the motions. He's completely deflated. He's he's stuck in this job, or he's stuck in trying to get this job, stuck with a mother he doesn't really enjoy being around. He's at the, I don't know, he might be in like, he would have finished university, I think, so maybe he's like mid-20s, I'm guessing, because he's done a MBA course. So he's going through stuff that's difficult, but the way he puts it off, he doesn't show anger. He almost shows just apathy, like
just total apathy.
Crap anymore. And that's what this sort of showed as well. He's like, I could get angry at you, and I could just get you to go, but what's the point? I'm just gonna be like, whatever. It's just get out of my way. Like,
another person not listening to me. Go.
Yeah, exactly. So they did a great job on that. But yeah, let's continue on, man. I think this is going along really good. And I feel like her attitude completely switched when you said the counselor thing. Like that's a part I wanted to just highlight even more, because it's a good continuation from the last scene on sort of the whole mental health thing and how this is sort of regarded. And like she was like, "Oh, why didn't you tell me earlier? I could have left you then." It feels like that's sort of the vibe I got.
Yeah, I never would have met you on this train.
Exactly.
And that hammer blow that she hits him with in just like a few seconds, where she's like, "I want you to go to sleep and sleep on it," and he just stares blankly off into the camera, like, "So you're not going to help me either, and nobody else is going to believe me." And this scene is actually a great opportunity for me to bring up one of the other things I thought. So obviously the songs in the culture for these films are enormously important and often revered and loved and beloved. And the song in here was great in the way that it was used. But I'm curious what other people thought about the song in this movie, because it was so... and maybe it was a respite before everything really started to unravel and we started to understand what the movie really was. But it's not that I'm going to say it was unnecessary, but it was a very, very stark juxtaposition from what the rest of the movie is. And that is nice to show you that Venu did have, at one point, like something that he could point to, something that he enjoyed, and the potential of a future with somebody else. And maybe that's to undercut or underscore later on what we see, how he needed to connect with his mother. But I'm curious what people thought of the song in this movie, and whether or not this was a well-liked song, or if people thought it was, what its role was in this movie, and if the culture really enjoyed this movie, did they enjoy the song as much as they did the movie in the placement that it was in? But another question, watching these scenes, like, I have to imagine it's not just spitballing between the actors, right? Like they're not just ad-libbing. I wonder if the directors and the scriptwriters are actually writing scenes for these people, and they're acting them, and then our songs are just filling in those gaps for us, so we understand the montage of it all and whatever the characters are going through. But I'm curious whether or not those are scripted. If anybody knows, please let me know, because that's another kind of unbelievable cinematic thing that I really locked into with this one. And I guess it's just because it didn't take me out of the movie, but I was focusing on it a little more, knowing what the film was. Like, they were acting. They're straight up
Yeah.
acting, you know, like in some of them in like in
talking about the
Drishyam, you know.
songs?
Yeah. Like, as the songs are going on, right? Like these people are acting. You know, they're actually speaking, they're conversing with one another.
Correct.
And I got to know if there's something that like a director tells them, like, this is what you're discussing. This is what I want to, I want the audience to see as the lyrics are being, you know, absorbed by the audience. I'm just really curious.
Yeah, no, I'd be curious too. I don't really know how the whole song sort of work, like in terms of like the filming of that and what the actors are sort of told to do during that time. Like, is it just like B-roll, like just go around shopping and then, you know, we'll fill it in and we'll do some good editing to get it all done, something like that. Like it could be even like, you know, off camera kind of stuff. It could be just them, you know, having to, you know, they tell them pretend like this is happening, or they might tell them a small scene and they just act like that or something like that. I'd be interested to know how that whole thing works as well, if anyone does know between that. But and the other point you sort of mentioned about the song, yeah, for me it was a note I also had while I was sort of watching this, because that song, I mean, there's one song in this movie, it comes right, or one and a half, there's like a whole techno song that also happens, but I'm not gonna include that one with what I'm talking about.
I like that song.
Yeah, no, me too. I love that one too. But this particular song that comes in, it's really, I guess, when they first, the first time we see them second time we see them together and actually enjoying, you know, being around each other. The first time, I guess, they didn't enjoy being around each other. But yeah, it was kind of interesting placement because it was also a good scene. I wanted to include that one as well, but yeah, I can't include everything. But essentially, in that, there's another scene which is really good, where like the phone drops and then he's accusing the mother of why did you destroy my phone, which was a fantastic scene. But then right after that, it goes to the song. And it felt like such a stark contrast as to what's happening.
That's what I'm saying. Like it almost kind of pulled it out, and and again, everything in the movie worked for me. It just happened to be something that I noticed a little bit more than I did in other movies. It's I want to be very careful with my words because I don't want to disparage anything. Again, I'm not a filmmaker. These people are filmmakers and they make fantastic films. But I just noticed it more.
Yeah. No, I felt it more in this one too. It felt a little bit, I guess the other ones I felt more seamless, I guess, because they've been a good
exactly.
And this one sort of just felt like it was placed there. Now, I know with songs, there's a whole lot of stuff around them because they use them for marketing material. They push them out to actually promote the movie as well. Like, especially, I think it's more important in Malayalam cinema because like they don't have as long of, I guess, promotions as sort of other industries do. Like they do a lot more promotional stuff than Malayalam cinema do. So this song could have been used as like a preview before the movie or something like that. But on, I guess, a filmmaking point of view, I did appreciate this because what it does is this movie is like mostly grim. Like it's a pretty sad movie most of the time. We're not seeing much. And, you know, it gets from grim to scary and it gets to like, you know, some happiness at the very end. But I like movies that play with emotions a bit more. Like if movies are just single tone, that's when I can't connect to them as well because I don't get to feel the characters, you know, what they're like outside of this. So I do appreciate this movie for actually giving us small moments, even though, you know, the song was pretty brief, but it gave us a moment where Vinu was actually, you know, smiling and actually happy. So we can actually see, okay, this is what life could be like for him if things go right. So, you know, I thought it was important in that, but yeah, I'm not really sure its placement. But in terms of this scene itself, I mean, I just thought this scene was absolutely fantastic because you just see, again, it highlights that further isolation. And if you keep watching this movie, and you might feel that as we sort of keep going along, he gets more and more isolated as we keep going until the breaking point, you know. And so does the mother, and the mother's performance, which we're going to talk about too, when sort of her scenes come around a bit more. But like, it was pretty fantastic to see, I guess, the character development, as I said, and sort of the path and journey this character takes. And it just keeps declining. And I think this was almost like one of the most heartbreaking scenes for him because he's like, look, my mother's not someone who I can talk too much. We have a hard time talking. I have you. I know things have not been perfect, but I'm going to confide in you this secret that no one's believing me. You'll believe me, right? And then it turns out,
and this is already after he's lost the job opportunity too, right?
Yeah,
like
correct.
So he hadn't lost it, but then he goes in the house and then he tries to turn on the light and he gets terrified and then he accidentally, you know, urinates on himself and then that's the end of that, you know. So then it's like, this is bad.
Mm-hmm. Really, really tough stuff, man. But we'll keep going.